Be me a few years ago, working on a remote project, the kind of job that pays well because nobody else wants to do it. Long hours, tough conditions, and you're stuck with the same group of guys for weeks on end. You either learn to get along or you go crazy. Our crew was solid. We'd been together for a while, knew each other's rhythm. No real drama, just work. The unspoken rule was simple. Do your job, don't make problems for anyone else, and pull your own weight. If you could do that, you were good. Nobody cared about your politics, your life back home, or anything else. Competence was the only currency that mattered out there. Our shift supervisor was Matthew, a guy who probably came out of the womb looking 50 years old and disappointed, fair but tough as nails. He had this way of looking at you that made you feel like you'd already messed up, even if you hadn't. But he was the best at what he did, and he respected anyone who worked hard. One morning, felt a bit colder than usual, Matthew calls us all for the pre-shift briefing. Standard stuff, safety checks, daily targets. Then he gets this weird look on his face. Tells us corporate has a new workplace enrichment initiative. A few of the guys groan. Matthew holds up a hand. He says we're getting a new team member, starting today. Says he wants to make one thing clear. He doesn't care who they are or where they come from. As long as they can do the work and follow instructions, they're one of us. If they can't, they're a liability. And he doesn't tolerate liabilities. His eyes scan across the whole crew, making sure the message lands. It did. We all just nodded and waited. A few minutes later, the transport chopper comes in for its supply drop. The doors slide open and she steps out. Emma. The first thing you noticed was the gear. It was brand new, pristine. The kind of stuff you see in a catalog, not on an actual work site. It looked like it was afraid of dirt. We all stood there in our worn, stained, and patched up equipment and just watched. She had this determined look on her face, like she was marching into enemy territory to plant a flag. Matthew walked over and greeted her, then brought her over to the crew. He introduced her as the newest member of the team. She gave us all a tight, professional smile. Then she said she was excited to be here, said she hoped to bring a fresh perspective and help us identify and dismantle some of the more toxic elements inherent in male-dominated work environments. Dead silence. One guy, a younger fella, coughed to break the tension. It was the loudest cough I'd ever heard. You could see the confusion on everyone's faces. We weren't a think tank. We were guys who moved heavy things and fixed broken machinery. What was there to dismantle? Matthew, to his credit, didn't even blink. He just nodded and said, "Right. Well, welcome aboard." He assigned her to work with Dave. Dave was the perfect choice. He was the most experienced guy on the crew, besides Matthew himself. Infinitely patient, a great teacher. If anyone could get her up to speed, it was him. Dave gave her a simple nod and told her to stick with him and do exactly as he said. Her smile tightened even more. You could already see she didn't like being told what to do. The first day was an interesting one. Dave started with the absolute basics. Safety protocols, tool sign-out, how to navigate the site without getting run over by something. Her first real task was simple manual labor, moving materials from a staging area to the active work zone. It wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. Everyone did it. Dave showed her the proper way to lift a heavy container, using a specific stance to protect your back. He was explaining the physics of it, why you use your legs and not your spine. She cut him off mid-sentence, told him she appreciated the thought, but she didn't need a man to explain her own body to her. She said she practiced yoga and was perfectly in tune with her physical capabilities. Dave just stopped talking and stepped back. He had this look on his face, a mix of surprise and resignation. He just gestured to the container, like, "Be my guest." So she grabs it, tries to hoist it up with all arms and back, exactly like he'd just told her not to. The container barely left the ground before she let out a little yelp and dropped it. It landed with a thud, dangerously close to her steel-toed boots. She stood there, rubbing her lower back, her face flushed. She looked over at Dave, probably expecting him to say something. He didn't. He just walked over, lifted the container with perfect form, and carried it over to where it needed to go. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't even look at her. That seemed to make her even angrier than if he had mocked her. For the rest of the morning, she struggled. Everything was a battle. She complained that the tools were too heavy, that they weren't designed for a woman's hands. She insisted that the reason she was slow was because the entire system was built by men, for men. Dave just kept his patience, showing her alternative techniques or lighter duty tasks she could do to contribute. Every suggestion he made was met with suspicion. She'd ask if he was giving her the easy work because he thought she was weak. Dave, bless his heart, would just calmly explain that he was giving her the work that needed to be done, in a way that she could actually do it. At lunch, things got even more awkward. The mess hall is usually loud, full of guys joking around, telling stories, complaining about the food. It's how we unwind. Emma sat down at a table with a few of the guys. She tried to start a conversation, asked them if they ever talked about their feelings, if they felt pressured by societal expectations of masculinity. The guys just stared at her, forks halfway to their mouths. They didn't know how to answer. These are men who show their feelings by showing up for their shift on time, even when they're exhausted to provide for their families. They show their friendship by helping a buddy out with a tough task without being asked. They don't use words for it. One guy just mumbled something about his favorite sports team and quickly changed the subject. The table fell into an uncomfortable silence. After a few minutes, the guys made their excuses and left, leaving her sitting there alone. I was sitting a few tables away, just watching. You could see the narrative forming in her head. She wasn't just an awkward fit. In her mind, she was being actively excluded. She was being silenced by the patriarchy, one greasy spoon at a time. The afternoon wasn't much better. She was assigned to a spotter role, basically watching a piece of heavy machinery and communicating with the operator over a radio to ensure safety clearances. It's a crucial job, but it's not physically demanding. It requires focus and clear communication. The operator started moving a large component into place. He asked for a distance check over the radio. Instead of giving him the numbers, she started her transmission with, "First of all, I'd appreciate it if you used a more inclusive tone of voice." There was a long pause on the radio. Then the operator, a guy named Mike, who rarely spoke more than 3 words at a time, just said, "What?" She went on to explain that his direct, commanding tone was a product of command and control toxic masculinity, and that a more collaborative approach would be better. All while he's holding a multi-ton piece of steel suspended in midair. You could hear the stress in his voice when he replied. He told her to just give him the numbers. She finally did, but her heart clearly wasn't in it. For the next hour, every communication was a struggle. She'd try to rephrase his direct questions or offer unsolicited feedback on his communication style. It slowed the entire operation down to a crawl. Matthew eventually came over to see what the holdup was. He listened to the radio exchange for about 30 seconds, his face getting darker with each word. He took the radio from Dave, who was overseeing the operation. He just said one word into it. "Emma," she replied, asking what he needed. Matthew's voice was dangerously calm. He told her to answer the operator's questions with only the information requested. No commentary, no suggestions, just the facts. He said if she couldn't do that, he'd find someone who could. She was quiet for a moment, then just said, "Copy." The rest of the shift, she was silent, doing the bare minimum required. The atmosphere was thick with resentment, her resentment of us, and our growing resentment of her being a massive drag on the team. That night, in the common area, was the incident with the calendar. It was this old, faded thing that had been on the wall for years. A promotional calendar from some tool company. It had a picture of a woman in a safety vest and a bikini, smiling and holding some oversized wrench. It was cheesy, dumb, and nobody had paid any attention to it in years. It was just part of the furniture. Emma saw it. She stopped dead in her tracks and just stared at it. You could see the outrage building. She marched over, ripped it off the wall, and tore it in half. She then threw it in the trash can and turned to face the room. There were maybe 10 of us in there, playing cards, watching TV. She announced that this kind of material objectifies women and creates a hostile environment. She said she was disappointed that nobody else had the courage to take it down. The room went quiet. Everyone just looked at her. Then one of the older guys, a quiet man who mostly kept to himself, stood up. He walked over to the trash can, picked out the 2 halves of the calendar, and walked over to the wall. He took a roll of duct tape from a nearby table and carefully taped the calendar back together right where it had been hanging. He didn't say a word to her. He just put it back, smoothed it out, and went back to his seat. The message was clear. "This is our space. You don't get to come in here and change it." Emma was sputtering, speechless. She looked around the room, waiting for someone to back her up. or at least challenge the guy. Nobody did. We all just went back to what we were doing, pretending she wasn't there. It was a brutal social lesson. Out here, you don't win arguments with lectures. You win them with quiet, unshakable action. She stormed out of the room. The next morning, you could tell she'd complained to Matthew. There was a mandatory all-hands meeting before the shift. Matthew stood before us, looking even more tired than usual. He said he'd received a complaint about the workplace environment. He didn't mention Emma by name, but everyone knew. He reminded us of the company's code of conduct and the importance of a respectful workplace. It was a standard corporate speech, but coming from him, it felt hollow. Then he looked directly at Emma. He said that a respectful workplace also means respecting the team's established culture, as long as it doesn't violate safety or basic decency. He said that respect is a two-way street and that it has to be earned. He then said that the most disrespectful thing a person can do on this site is to not do their job properly, as it puts everyone else at risk. He ended the meeting by saying the calendar could stay, but he expected everyone, and he emphasized everyone, to focus on the work. It was a masterclass in management. He addressed her complaint by the book, but also validated the crew's feelings and subtly put her on notice. Emma was fuming. She had gone to the authorities, and the authorities had basically told her to get back to work. Her power play had failed. That was the day she started working with a little notebook. During breaks or any lull in the work, she'd be off in a corner, scribbling furiously. We all knew what she was doing. She was building a case, documenting every perceived slight, every joke she didn't understand, every time someone used a tone she didn't like. It changed the dynamic completely. Before, the guys were just annoyed with her. Now, they were wary. Nobody wanted to be a character in her little book of grievances. The easy chatter and banter that made the long days bearable started to dry up whenever she was around. People would stop talking mid-sentence if she walked by. It was like a black hole of morale. Dave was really feeling the strain. He was still assigned to her, and it was his responsibility to make sure she was working safely. But it was impossible. She questioned every single instruction. If he told her to check the fluid levels on a generator, she'd ask why he was giving her a domestic task. If he asked her to help secure a perimeter, she'd accuse him of not trusting her near the important machinery. It was a no-win situation. He tried to have a frank conversation with her during a water break. I was close enough to overhear it. He told her, in the calmest voice he could manage, that this wasn't about gender. It was about safety and efficiency. He told her that she was a rookie, and rookies, regardless of who they are, need to listen to the veterans to learn the ropes and stay alive. He said, "We've had other new guys, and they all went through the same process. Listen, learn, prove yourself, and then you become part of the team." She listened to his whole speech, her arms crossed. When he was done, she told him that his perspective was skewed by his privilege. She said that the concept of paying your dues was a tool used by the dominant group to haze and control newcomers, and she wasn't going to participate in her own oppression. Dave just looked at her. I saw something break in his eyes that day. The endless patience was gone. He just turned around and walked away without another word. From that point on, he only gave her direct, simple, one-sentence commands. No explanations, no advice, just the bare minimum to keep the work moving and prevent her from hurting herself. Her isolation was now complete. She had successfully alienated every single person on the site, from the greenest new guy to the shift supervisor. She had come here to dismantle a toxic environment. Instead, she had become the toxic element that the entire crew's immune system was trying to reject. And we were only on day 2. The worst was yet to come. The next day was day 3 of the Emma experiment. The mood on site had shifted from curiosity and annoyance to a kind of cold, quiet resentment. Her little notebook was out more often. She'd stand there during a task, supposedly observing, but you could see her eyes darting around, looking for infractions. It was like working with an internal affairs agent who hated you. Guys started double-checking their own work, not for safety, but to make sure they weren't doing anything she could twist into a complaint. The natural flow of the team was gone. Everything was stiff and formal whenever she was within earshot. That morning, we had a job that required some precision teamwork. It involved guiding a large, sensitive piece of equipment into a tight housing. It takes 2 people working in sync. One person operates the winch controls, and the other, the ground guide, gives hand signals to make micro adjustments, up, Down, left, right, slow, stop. Simple, effective, a system we'd all used 1,000 times. Dave was on the controls. He tried to give the ground guide role to Emma, probably because it involved no heavy lifting and kept her in a safe, visible position. She refused. She said the system of one person giving orders and the other blindly following was a flawed hierarchical model. She proposed a more collaborative method, where they would both discuss each move before it was made. Dave tried to explain that the whole point of the hand signals was to provide instant, clear, non-verbal communication when noise levels were high and time was critical. You can't have a committee meeting when a 2-ton component is dangling from a cable. She wouldn't hear it. She accused him of being resistant to innovation and new ideas. Matthew was overseeing another task nearby, but he was watching this exchange. He didn't intervene. I think he was letting her have the rope to see what she'd do with it. So Dave, with the patience of a saint, agreed to try it her way. It was a disaster. He'd start to lower the equipment, and she'd hold up a hand and yell, "Wait, let's reevaluate the trajectory." She'd walk around it, humming and looking at it from different angles, while Dave had to keep the tension on the line. What should have been a 10-minute job stretched into 45 minutes. The rest of the crew working on that section had to just stand around and wait. Productivity ground to a halt. Finally, Matthew walked over. He didn't say anything to Emma. He just looked at another crew member and pointed at Emma's position. The guy nodded, went over, and took the guide rope from her hand. Matthew then looked at Emma and said, "Go inventory the supply locker." It was the workplace equivalent of being sent to the corner, a make-work task to get her out of the way so the actual work could get done. She was livid. She threw the guide rope on the ground and stomped off toward the storage units, muttering about how her expertise was being wasted. As soon as she was gone, the new guide stepped in. He and Dave exchanged a quick look, and then it was like watching a ballet, a hand signal, a slight lever movement. Another signal, another adjustment. The equipment slotted perfectly into place in under 2 minutes. The rest of the guys let out a collective sigh of relief and got back to work. It was a perfect demonstration of the problem. She wasn't just annoying, she was inefficient. In a job where time is money and efficiency is safety, she was a walking, talking liability. She spent the rest of the day in the supply locker, counting bolts and logging inventory sheets. The mood on the worksite improved dramatically. Guys started joking again. The pace picked up. It was like a storm cloud had passed. That evening, she tried a new tactic. She approached a few of the younger guys in the mess hall. I guess she figured they were more enlightened and might be easier to win over. She sat down and started talking about how the older generation of workers, guys like Dave and Matthew, were stuck in their ways. How they were perpetuating a cycle of toxic masculinity that hurt everyone, including the young men. She told them they didn't have to be like that. They could be allies. They could help her change things from the inside. One of the young guys, a kid who couldn't be more than 20, just looked at her. He said, "Ma'am, with all due respect, Dave taught me everything I know. He kept me from getting seriously hurt my first week here. He's a good man." Then he and his friends got up and moved to another table. That was the last time she tried to recruit anyone. She had failed to divide the group. If anything, her presence was making the crew even more unified. We were all united in our shared experience of dealing with her. Day 4 started with a sense of inevitability. Something had to give. You can't have one person working against the entire team and expect things to function. Matthew knew it. We all knew it. That day's main project was a pressure test on a newly installed section of the system. It's a high-stakes procedure. You slowly increase the pressure, checking for leaks or weaknesses at every stage. It requires careful monitoring and communication. Matthew put Dave in charge of the test itself, handling the main controls. He assigned another experienced tech to check the seals and joints down the line. He assigned Emma to the simplest, but arguably one of the most important jobs. He put her at a secondary monitoring station about 50 yards away from the main pump. Her only job was to watch a single, large analog pressure gauge. Matthew pointed to a red line on the dial. He told her, "If this needle touches this red line, you press this big red button right next to it. That's it. Nothing else. Don't touch anything else. Just watch the needle. If it touches the line, you push the button." The button was an emergency shutoff, a failsafe. He made her repeat the instructions back to him. She did, with a sullen look on her face. It was a job you could train a monkey to do, but it was critical. If the pressure went over the limit and she didn't hit the button, the whole section could blow. So the test began. Dave started slowly bringing up the pressure from the main console. Everything was going smoothly. The tech down the line was giving thumbs up. I was on a different task nearby, but I had a clear view of Emma's station. For the first 20 minutes, she did her job. She stood there, staring at the gauge, but you could see she was getting bored, agitated. She started pacing back and forth in the small area. She looked over at Dave, who was intensely focused, making tiny adjustments at the main console. She looked at the other tech, who was carefully inspecting the equipment. They were doing the real work. She was just watching a needle, and I think that's what set her off. In her mind, she was being sidelined again, given a pointless task to keep her out of the way. She couldn't understand that the simple, boring task was the most vital one. I saw her lean in and look at the panel in front of her. Besides the gauge and the big red button, there were a few smaller valves and switches, clearly labeled for diagnostics and maintenance. They were not supposed to be touched during operation. She must have decided that the pressure was rising too slowly, that Dave was being overly cautious and inefficient. She must have thought she could help speed things up, that she could prove she knew what she was doing. I saw her reach out and turn a small, bright yellow valve right below the gauge. I don't know what she thought it would do. Maybe she thought it was a throttle. It wasn't a throttle. It was the manual bypass for the primary pressure regulator. The effect was instant. Instead of a slow, controlled increase, the system was suddenly hit with the full, unregulated pressure from the main pump. The needle on her gauge didn't just touch the red line. It shot past it in a blur. Before she could even react or think to press the button she was supposed to press, we heard it. A loud bang followed by an ear-splitting roar. A safety valve a few feet away from Dave's console blew. A massive jet of high-pressure steam and scalding water erupted sideways, directly into the area where he was standing. Alarms started blaring across the entire site, red lights flashing everywhere. Dave screamed. He managed to stumble away from the worst of the blast, but his left arm and side were soaked. The whole site went into lockdown. The main system automatically shut down, but the damage was done. Matthew and the site medics were on Dave in seconds, cutting away his sleeve, applying emergency burn treatment. Everyone else rushed to their emergency stations. And in the middle of all the controlled chaos, Emma just stood at her post, frozen. Her face was pale with shock. She was staring at the valve she had turned, then at the chaos she had caused. The look on her face wasn't guilt or even fear. It was a look of complete, utter disbelief, as if she couldn't process that her small, well-intentioned action could have such a catastrophic result. It took about 20 minutes to get the situation fully under control and get Dave stabilized for transport. The burns were bad, but the medics said he'd be okay. He was lucky. If he'd been standing 2 feet closer, it could have been fatal. Once Dave was airlifted out, Matthew, his face like a thundercloud, walked slowly and deliberately over to Emma's station. The rest of us just watched. She saw him coming and seemed to snap out of her trance. The shock was replaced by defensiveness. She started talking before he was even within 10 feet of her. She said it wasn't her fault. The equipment must be faulty. The labels on the panel were confusing. She said she hadn't been given adequate training for this specific scenario. She was already building her defense, constructing a narrative where she was the victim of a poorly run, unsafe system. Matthew didn't say a word. He walked right up to the panel, looked at the valve she had turned, and then looked at her. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the air better than any shout. He asked her, "Did I tell you to touch that valve?" She stammered, "No, but I thought—" He cut her off. "I'm not interested in what you thought." He pointed to the gauge. "I told you to watch a needle." He pointed to the button. "I told you to push a button." Then he looked her dead in the eye. "You had 2 simple instructions. You failed to follow both of them. Instead, you did the one thing you were explicitly told not to do. You touched something you don't understand." He took a step closer. "An experienced man is on his way to a hospital because of you. This project has been set back by days and will cost this company a fortune. You are not just incompetent. You are a danger to this crew." She opened her mouth to argue, her face turning red with indignation. She started to say something about his aggressive tone. Matthew just raised his hand. "You're fired. Pack your things. The transport chopper that took Dave out will be back for you in 1 hour. Be on it." He turned around and walked away, already giving orders to his crew to begin damage assessment. He didn't give her a second glance. She just stood there, speechless for a full minute. The finality of it finally hit her. There was no HR department to appeal to, no committee to hear her grievances. Out here, the chain of command was absolute, and she had just committed the ultimate workplace sin. She had hurt a team member through her own arrogance. We all watched as she did the walk of shame back to her quarters. An hour later, she was standing on the helipad with her bag, her brand new gear now covered in a light layer of grime. She wouldn't look at any of us. As the chopper lifted off, a strange sense of quiet fell over the sight. It wasn't celebratory. It was just relief. The tension that had been building for 4 days was finally gone. One of the guys walked past me and clapped me on the shoulder. "Well," he said, "back to work." And that's what we did. A few weeks later, after our rotation was over and I was back home, I got curious. I searched her name online. I found her blog. The top post was a long, rambling article titled, "My Voice Will Not Be Silenced: Surviving the Front Lines of Systemic Workplace Misogyny." She had twisted the entire story into a heroic tale of a lone woman standing up to a brutal backward system. She described the crew as a pack of savages. She claimed Matthew fired her because she was about to expose the site's numerous safety violations. The incident that got her fired? In her version, she had bravely averted a catastrophic explosion caused by Dave's negligence, and he was injured in the process. She was a hero, a martyr. At the end of the article, there was a link to a fundraising page to help support her independent journalism and activism. I just stared at the screen for a minute. I wasn't even angry. I just felt tired. Some people live in a world made of facts and consequences. And some people live in a world made of stories they tell themselves. And nothing, not even reality itself, can ever bridge that gap. I closed the laptop. Out on the project site, the work went on.